You're on.
All right. Good afternoon, Police Commission. I can honestly say this is the first time I've had to do something like this, addressing a group virtually, or actually pre-recording something. Actually, I've done it a couple of times. I've had to do it with my people internally as well as Police Commission, but we're kind of in a different time now, and this is a good way for us to be able to communicate and a good way for us to stay connected. And I really enjoy and appreciate the opportunity to share some information with you guys as we're kind of waiting for some things to settle down and getting back to what things are going to look like as we return to some sense of normalcy as we saw it before our pandemic hit. So I've got a series of questions that commissioners have communicated and some comments. So I'm going to use my time to just kind of go through those with you all and maybe respond to some of them and give you some information about what's going on. One of the first comments that's on here is from Terry Robertson, who it was just a comment about expressing tremendous support for EPD, especially during this challenging time, and just our commitment and our service to this community. I think I'll pause here for just a second and just, we as law enforcement officers and professionals have always known what we were going to sign up for. The difference for us in this particular case is what we've often signed up for is facing dangers and threats that are known to us. We very seldomly understand, or we seldomly ever have a situation like this where the threat is completely unknown or invisible to us. But I think the one piece of this that sometimes is lost and forgotten is that for the first time ever, we as first responders are engaged in our community and responding to issues in our community and potentially bringing that threat home with us. And so we've always known about the emotional and the mental fatigue that we have doing that. And so we certainly bring those things home with us, and we have to be mindful of our wellness. But we never ever in our wildest imagination thought we might put something home that's a silent assassin as the COVID-19 virus is. And so officers are doing really, really well, but we're being really mindful of the fact that as they do their job, there's a potential that they bring their family members and put their family members in harm's way. And the family members and that piece of it, we didn't necessarily sign up for. And so that's been challenging and it's been tough. But what I've been so proud of this organization, though, that even with those challenges and even with that level of uncertainty, officers are out in the community. They're responding to calls for service. We had a significant shooting just yesterday, and one of the officers who was first on scene recognized life-saving emergency medical treatment needed to happen, and we didn't have the time to stop and take a pause and put on all of our PPE. He just jumped in there, applied pressure to a gunshot wound in an attempt to save this young man's life. And that's the quality and the caliber of people that you have working at EPD, is that we constantly put the service above ourselves. And maybe in some cases to our detriment, but it is certainly prevalent in our organization to put service above self. So thank you for that comment, Terry, about our service. Will Davey actually had a couple of questions that I thought would be of interest for many of you. He was asking if we've had any EPD officers test positive for coronavirus. The answer is no. We had a close call, or what we thought was a scare with some significant symptoms, but that was a negative test. And so we have not had any officers test positive for coronavirus. I don't even know of any family members of our officers right now that have tested positive. We think about Lane County. Lane County has actually been pretty resilient. We're a good size in the sense that we have lots of space. We're not overly populated, and we have really good healthcare. And so, and it's a very enlightened community in Lane County, especially in Eugene. We've taken this very seriously and adhered to an awful lot of our physical distancing that needs to happen to flatten our curve. So no positive tests so far in the EPD family. His second question was, there have been some concerns that the stay-at-home order would lead to increased domestic violence incidents, as EPD's found that to be true in our area. We've seen an uptick in disturbance calls, maybe a slight uptick in domestic violence. but we've seen an uptick in our disturbance calls, and that's not uncommon when people get sheltered in place and are in the homes together with family members that maybe they're not used to being around 24/7. I think I think it's safe to say that there is a higher than usual intake of alcohol right now as people have different ways of coping with this, and so we have seen an increase in our disturbance calls and a slight increase in our domestic violence calls. The piece we don't know yet that really concerns anything is how many children are home in unsafe environments. So school for many kids is the safest place for them to be during the day because of the lack of functionality at home. And so I think the piece that we don't know is the amount of abuse that's occurring with our children that are home, and without mandatory reporters like our school teachers and nurses and counselors seeing these kids every single day, we've seen that drop off. Our sexual assaults have dropped off because we're just not seeing anybody reporting anything right now. So that's really concerning for me. His third question is, USA Today reports that police departments nationwide have been seeing sharp drops in crime rates, especially burglaries and assaults. Does that seem to hold true for our area? Our crime stats have dropped off a little bit, but it's been small single-digit decreases. Our overall crime and our overall calls for service data has been pretty steady. Having said that, when we started, the baseline for this is the fact that we were, our calls for service and our crime was outpacing our capacity to answer. So it's hard to see officers being freed up with more time to do other things because we're still that busy that every single day we have officers responding to calls for service. So we haven't seen a steep drop in our crime rates like maybe some other areas have. And actually we've had some crime go up significantly during this time. Our vandalism and criminal mischief crimes are going through the roof right now. And it's unfortunate that people during this time have chosen to engage in that kind of behavior and just wander around the downtown and wander around our parking garages that are largely vacant and just spray paint whatever they can get their hands on. It's just really frustrating, and it's just really in a time of community needing to come together that we still have so many people that just could care less, and they actually just make it even harder on everybody by vandalizing businesses and spray painting and doing those kinds of things. So it's been kind of tough. Matt, you had a couple of questions here. Thanks for your thanks. I'll pass that along for the good efforts during the difficult time. A few questions here, all around policy as a police commission should is what, if any, policies may need to be revisited? What if any new policies need to be reviewed? Are the first two questions, which are really, really good questions. I think part of what will be great for the police commission to do is after we're done with this and we can come together, is to reflect on how we've done business differently during this pandemic and whether or not some of those practices, we've identified some of those practices as actually being really, really efficient, and whether we need to build them into kind of our policy or build them into our ability to leverage those practices in policy. And so it'll be interesting to hear the commission's thoughts on that as we get creative about all of our experiences of how we've done work differently, whether it's in the police department or like, Bill Whalen and the banking industry. How has this changed the banking industry, and how have you found efficiencies there, and what can we bring, and what could we use here in the police department that makes sense instead of just policy as it was. It may be policy a little bit different and reimagined based on our experiences. The other question is am I requesting the board provide any additional resource at this time? And what can community members do if interested to support the efforts of the police department at this time? I think there's nothing specific in the interim that I would ask from the board other than being ready to get back to work when it's time to get back to work, because I think while we've been away, we've recognized some deficiencies in really significant policy on how we address in custody deaths, and maybe a gap there that I'd like this commission to be able to review and weigh in on. And so we've got some homework for you to do. I've got some things on my mind that I think that we've revealed as gaps and vulnerabilities that the police commission can sink their teeth into. And community members, as far as supporting our efforts at this time, we've had tremendous support. You know, first and foremost, we need people to do their part in this community to help us get past this time, and everybody knows what their responsibilities are, both in their homes and if they have to go out. I think we've had tremendous support from people that have been delivering and showing up with food, or had food vendors stop by to feed our first responders, those types of things. I think the other thing I would say right off the top of my head is, as we move to this kind of mask CDC recommendation around the wearing of cloth masks or wearing of masks out in public, is that we have a significant shortage of personal protective equipment for police and fire and healthcare workers. And so if if a community has masks that are N95 or even KN95 masks that are more appropriately distributed amongst our first responders and healthcare workers, that you would turn those in and move to something more along the lines of a cloth mask that certainly meets the requirements, and leave those pieces of equipment available for first responders and healthcare workers. We're trying to source those things right now are really tough. We're hoping to get a big shipment in, but right now it's been really tough. So thank you for that question. So Sean, Shivers had a few questions from community members that he's been out and about with. It says, how are police staying safe during this time when they are often unable to maintain social distance? It's a great question, and so true, that we try to do everything. We try to do as many things as we can from the phone. There's a lot of things we can do over the phone and having talks with people. And events that we have to talk to somebody or go collect evidence, we're having people come out to their outside front porch. We're trying not to enter homes as much as we normally would, and trying to keep that safe 6-foot distance, which is really, really important. Officers do have PPE, so they have wraparound eyewear, gloves, and masks. And so we're encouraging them to wear those and utilize those where appropriate. Anymore, you find officers that just wander around almost their entire shift with varying, with latex gloves on their hands, swapped out many times a day, but they're just being good about that. We're making sure that we are sanitizing cars, and we're sanitizing workspaces, and we're doing all those things. So like I said, we've been fairly healthy, so we might do something right when it comes to that. Have there been any serious morale concerns, given that police officers' service and potential exposure puts their families at risk? I talked about that a little bit earlier. Morale is really, really good, but I would tell you that we have law enforcement professionals, police officers, and professional staff members that are cognizant of the fact that when they're out doing the work that they're doing, that they potentially bring home something from a contact that they've had. And so we're trying to be really careful about that. And so the city has done a fantastic job of supporting employees with opening up leave banks and making it very, very easy to access emergency leave at no financial cost to them. So the city has been a great employer when it comes to that. And I think that puts them at ease, and it helps ease their concerns when it comes to that. I've heard much concern that the homeless population will be disproportionately targeted by stay-at-home enforcement. And what I would tell you is that we've pretty much we've pretty much done nothing around camping enforcement. So we've got outreach teams that are dealing with folks, trying to move them to safer places and create social and physical distancing. We are not dealing with our homeless population even remotely like we were before, unless there is a significant criminal and behavioral issue or health safety issue. We're pretty much letting them shelter in place. One caveat to that is that we are going to start enforcing some rules in our neighborhood parks, which are designated as neighborhood parks that have a tendency to be really small. And there's some camps going up in those, like Monroe Park for right now is one of those things that we're paying attention to, and we'll be doing some relocating of some people when it comes to that. But there's not been hardly any enforcement at all with our homeless population. We've come to expect a respectful and de-escalation approach from our officers, and the question is, I imagine that has served us well, as physical confrontation is even more highly discouraged than usual, and that's for sure. You know, contrary to beliefs, sometimes our officers are really good with their words and really good talking themselves out of things and resolving things without having to escalate or without having to respond to any level of resistance by somebody. And so you're absolutely right that that skill set comes in handy when you're trying to stay 6 foot away from somebody and trying to get them to do what you want them to do. So it's about call volume decreasing and whether or not that's happened. Call volume hasn't decreased that much. We're still seeing the same amount of calls. And so it's really been business as usual for us out there. Another question about domestic violence. Domestic violence. Domestic violence is an issue and has gone up a little bit. But the hard part is imagining what maybe is going on out there that we don't know about. And there's so many people that are dug in and just minding their own business that we may not be getting the phone calls that we need. Let's see, I talked about our PPE and doing that kind of stuff. So let me move on to some questions from V. And again, I think my earpieces are starting to run out of juice, and so I apologize for that. So we may have to switch over here. He's asking about our ability to keep a functioning police force if fewer personnel are able to report to work. We are taking some measures now. We're fully staffed, but I'm not having all the staff at work at the same time. We're having different deployment strategies, so some people can come into work while others are at home. We're taking turns on that. There's a rotation. There's a rotation on that, and so we're trying to not have people at home where we don't need to have them at home. How are social distancing still practiced during an arrest when officers have to get close contact with suspects? It just doesn't happen. We're following CDC guidelines where an exposure really is somebody with a known COVID diagnosis within 6 feet for an hour or more is really what an exposure is. And so the key for us is if we have to go hands-on, it's very quick. And we engage, we disengage, and then we practice good hygiene and do those things. So engage, disengage very quickly, and wash up and wash down and sanitize. That's the best that we're going to be able to do with that. And then the last question he has is with the shortage of the COVID test kits, has there been any discussion on when officers are given a test? And are the officers making fewer small-time crime arrests amid the pandemic? Yeah, there's some of those livability crimes that we're not responding to in person. We'll take them over the phone. In some cases, we're choosing not to go. And people have been great about understanding that we're not going to come and put ourselves in harm's way or actually put them in harm's way from being exposed to us as well, if we can handle something over the phone. And so there is a reduction in those times. And right now we're still waiting to see what the testing looks like for first responders and freeing that up specifically for first responders. But I will say, if we meet the criteria, we're bumped to the front of the line as a first responder to get a test. But we still have to meet some criteria to be able to do that. It can't just be a test for the sake of testing. It would actually have to be something that meets that criteria. But very quickly they will test us. And we've had at least one officer I know of go into his private care physician and had some symptoms, but because he was a first responder, it bumped him up to make sure he got one of those early tests. And so we did that. So those are the thoughts from you guys. For me, The only thing I would say in closing is that we're being really mindful of budget and what the budget looks like. We know the budget looks and feels differently for fiscal year 21 just because of some revenues that are down. We're trying to come up with a good game plan for the community safety initiative. I know you've been interested in that and really supportive of that, and what it means for implementation and what it means for businesses, and not wanting to aggravate an already tough situation for businesses and employees that are around the payroll tax. And so we're coming up with a good game plan on that while trying to still keep our positive momentum forward, moving forward. We saw a light at the end of the tunnel with our capacity to serve the needs of this community better. We do not want to lose that momentum. We're in a great spot right now where we can take a little bit of a hiring pause because we're fully staffed, both in dispatch and in the police department for sworn personnel. So there's a good time for us to be able to slow down a little bit and catch our breath and see what the financial picture looks like. And then we'll come up with a good game plan. But I'll keep you posted on how that looks and how those conversations are coming. I think by the end of this week, I will have had 4 different hour to hour and a half long finance meetings around a variety of issues with this. So I'll have more information. Next time we chat, I'll have some more information and be able to communicate with you kind of where we're at with that. So with that, Jeremy, I'm going to end my comments and let you do what you need to do. And as always, Commission, thank you so much for being a part of us and this organization and the EPD family, and just your attention to detail for the way we do things, and your support of the men and women that fill this need in our community. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you so much, Chief.